good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's V the Gorilla Economist coming to you live with my main man El Cuco himself, CJ, working the airwaves, making sure this airplane, this broadcast is going out good. I'm losing it. I don't have enough coffee this morning. You can check us out at roguenews.com, and you can also get our paid sponsors. Check out our paid sponsors, mycbdedibles.com, mycbdedibles.com, where all your CBD edible goodness is right there. Check it out for you. It's going to be amazing. And we have with us our special guest. The man needs no introduction himself. It is the one and only London Paul. London Paul joins us this morning to break down elections, to break down lockdowns, to break down this entire geopolitical landscape that's been thrown into disarray. And with that being said, CJ and Paul, what's up, gentlemen? How are you?
Good morning.
Yes, good morning,
Buenos
and
dias.
and everything else. Buenos dias. Yeah.
Speaking of Buenos dias, do you have that clip from Spain? It was a Buenas noches, and if we don't do something to push back against these psychopathic globalists, this is coming to a street near you, folks. This is coming to a street near you. Go ahead, CJ. Cue the video. Oh yeah, it's that curfew. In this eternal flame.
Do you know what I like is he didn't even break a note when that whatever that was, it a gunfire or something went off.
Yeah,
Tear
that
gas
explosion.
or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
he just carried on without
yes.
even breaking, stride.
It was incredible. That was the best thing. And then I heard shortly after that he was hauled off in jail, tasered multiple times, fined for breaking curfew, and thrown back on the street for something.
And then he carried on playing again.
And then he carried on playing. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. Anyway, Paul, lots going on, man. Lots to unpack. The world of bureaucracies. And, there's one common theme I find amongst government bureaucrats throughout the world, and they are the most lowest, bottom of the barrel denominator, and they have an absolute monopoly in stupidity. So, Paul, where do you want to begin with this nonsense? It's crazy, man.
Yeah, well, as ever, there's people who don't like things I say, in the comments. That's fine. It's we're not here to all agree with each other, but the problem, I know a lot of people are very, very concerned that there's some great big grand plan unfolding in the world with regards to the pandemic, and yet, if we just look at it in very simple terms, whatever we want, you can call it deep state, globalist, whatever you want to call it. They've spent the last decade trying to prevent the collapse of everything, even to the point of absurdity with QE, zero interest rate policy. And yet somehow we're suddenly supposed to believe that this virus happened, and then they went, no, let's just collapse everything. And what I think a lot of that fuels this belief is people in the West are looking at it going, this empire can never collapse. It just has to, it'll carry on. The dollar will never die. The pound won't die. The euro won't die. This empire can never end. So if you believe that, then you have to try and find sense in what's happened and go, well, therefore the empire can't collapse, therefore it must be engineered. Well, there's nothing engineered about it. And if you extrapolate this and look at the scenario and say, okay, they destroy everything. Well, when they destroy everything, that's all the corporations go. The banking system's gone. Everything's gone. Most of the population doesn't have a job anymore. And then they put everyone on universal basic income. That's the lowest common denominator where everyone ends up. And you say, okay. So in that scenario, if they did that, what happens in reality? You don't have a financial system. You don't have a banking system. You're not going to have a stock market, a derivatives market. You're going to have no corporations because no one's got any money to buy anything. And if you put universal basic income ad infinitum, you're just going to print trillions and trillions of dollars that debases the currency even more and sends the US, the UK into Venezuelan territory. How does that benefit those people who are in that position currently? It doesn't. It destroys everything. And here's the other point. The reason they're trying to destroy China and Russia is because they know the Eurasian axis, the multipolar world, is going to replace it. So they're trying to keep this system going, even though it's failing anyway. They're trying to prevent the rise of China, Russia, Iran, and all those nations from failing. Why? Because they know once their empire's gone, then it's not an empire, but it's a new kind of the rise of the East, the rise of the multipolar world, and the end of Western or dominance, Western empire, US dollar, US hegemony, and it's gone. And once it's gone, it's gone. And the reason primarily why it's disintegrating rapidly is because the world's rejecting the dollar. Well, people say, oh, but they'll come out with a digital currency. Well, the dollar already is a digital currency effectively. So what they do is they come out with another fiat digital currency that the world's already rejecting, and the world's going to go, yeah, we'll embrace a new digital currency, no problem. We rejected the other one for all the reasons, but we'll kind of have amnesia and forget why we did it and adopt another one. No, once it's gone, it's gone. So there isn't. It's just this idea that as well that governments can't be so incompetent to make all the mistakes they've made. And this is, and I have to be very careful. I'm not saying there aren't people trying to take advantage of this. There's people trying to profit from it. There's people thinking, well, you've got drug companies, vaccine companies go, well, it's a big payday for us. And no one's disputing any of this, but that's a world of difference from saying that somehow they convinced 200 countries in the world, tens of millions of people associated with, to all be part of a plan, including the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians who've been trying to prevent the very same people destroying them, going, yeah, we'll be part of this plan. Why are they going to do that? Absolutely never are they going to do that. So the problem is, and I can't speak for the United States, but I can speak for the UK with regards to, because I made a point of getting in touch with government, in touch with the advisors who advise government on policy. And when you actually engage with them directly, the problem fundamentally is, and I know people will disagree and it's fine, but I'm telling you what is our reality from a UK perspective. The policymakers are told to go out and map the worst case scenario. Now, the fact the worst case scenario never happens is not the point. So they map the worst case scenario because their philosophy is if we don't, and then it did explode into something, well, it's okay, it never has. They think we're on the chopping block, our head's on the line. The government gets the information, and in the UK, the government's been extremely resistant for weeks and months to having another lockdown because they know, well, Sunak, as much as anyone, knows what the economic damage is. It'll cause capitulation. But then they get this information and they're sat there going, well, if it does happen to transpire this way and we don't act on it, then our heads on the chopping block. So they're all collectively sat there going, well, we've got no choice. Now, the other problem is there's all these people producing lots of great data that contradicts the worst case scenario. And it's getting drowned out. And that's the important part, that is there a need for a lockdown now? There's plenty of people going, absolutely not. The fatal mistake the West made was way back, you have one lockdown, no more. And in that time, you put in processes in place that means you never have a lockdown again. You don't wreck your economy. You shield the important people who are most vulnerable, which is a very, very small subset of society. And you work on that base, and we completely failed to do it. So now we're sucked into this cycle of lockdown, ease restrictions, lockdown, ease restrictions, lockdown, ease restrictions. Look at Asia, look at China. Life's back to normal. They've had normal life for months. Their economy's normal. They don't have these problems.
That's because, many people, here's the thing. The difference, people always ask, is it a cultural thing, the difference between China, Japan, Korea, countries in the East where things are back to normal? It's not just a cultural thing, Paul. And what people miss is this. When you look at much of the parliament and the politicians of both the European states, UK, and even in the United States, 99% of these curmudgeons who wind up in office are all, as we say in New York, lawyers. They're all lawyers, Paul. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They're all lawyers. They're all scum-sucking attorneys. These are double-minded people that are in positions of power. In China, and I'm no fan of the Chinese, and Japan, and in Taiwan, and in Korea, and in Russia, guess what? Their politicians are scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, or military background. It is a far cry different than scum-sucking lawyers, and that's the difference.
Well,
Yeah, and
real quick too, in terms
go
of because I agree in terms of an agenda and a master plan, but what we cannot miss out is the part where it became part of an agenda and leveraging COVID for a lot of different things.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I don't want to mistake that point of it, because similar to post 9/11, what happened? You know, the tragedy that occurred, and whether you believe that, you know, whoever did it, and instead of the U.S. going directly to Afghanistan, what did we do? We went after Iraq, and we excused that because it became part of agenda, part of the plan. And I think that's where we currently are, where people said, well, wait a minute here. Let's, in the infamous word of, Rahm Emanuel, let's not let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that's strategically different. You know, one would never want to think that in a modern day society that there would be people out there who'd want to leverage a virus for all types of different agendas, all different types of programs. But let's not be naive to think that that's not going to occur, because that's exactly what's happening.
Oh, I think it's particularly bad in the US. For people to laugh. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Democrats are trying to leverage it for in their own states. No one's disputing any of that. I'm not suggesting politicians are nice, wonderful, warm and fuzzy people that we should all embrace either. But the point is, the other thing is, it is an absolute impossibility to coordinate a global conspiracy to have a pandemic and everyone to play ball with it. It just look. The Western cabal can't even manage one nation. It couldn't control things in Syria. It can't control things in Ukraine or Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq. In the history, but somehow they managed to coerce an entire planet to be part of the same game. Absolutely not. China, Russia, Iran, absolutely no chance. They would never risk their own economies, their own government structures to benefit Western interests. Absolutely no chance. And it's not even beneficial to Western interests, because ultimately, it's like people, someone said to me, oh, well, they're going to destroy all the small businesses. Well, yes. I don't dispute if it carries on. All SMEs are all going to collapse, but so are all the corporations collapsing. And here's the point. Someone said to me, well, everything's getting concentrated into the hands of Amazon. Well, okay, let's just say for an argument's sake it does. And what happens when no one's got a job, no one's got any money, you've got hyperinflation, no one's going to be buying any products from Amazon. So Amazon will go bust as well. You can't have a situation where you implode something and then you can map out how 300 odd million Americans are going to react, how corporations are going to react, how other nations will react to this happening. You can't quantify and sit down and work all that out and tell me, oh, well, we've got a plan and we know what we're doing. Absolutely, you can't. To actually really believe that defies belief, because it's impossible. You cannot coordinate that many nations, that many people, with major adversaries to all be part of something that ultimately is going to be damaging to varying degrees. Okay, China's ridden the storm and it's not damaging their economy. In fact, quite the reverse, but that's Southeast Asia. But here's the thing. Who is suffering? What nations are suffering the most? For all the reasons, it's the fall of the West. The West is collapsing. That's why the West has not handled it. For all manner of reasons why the West is collapsing, and the rise of the East, Southeast Asia, China, all the other nations, the Asian nations, Russia. because they're the rise. That's the diametric opposed situation. Whereas one empire rises and the other collapses. The one that's collapsing is completely mishandled the whole virus for a lot of reasons, and the East handled it perfectly.
Paul,
and that is not a coincidence.
And Paul, at the end of the day, when you take a step back and you look at the 60,000-foot view of this quote unquote virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is something. The West dies because there is a cancerous ideology that has crept into the West, and that is in Europe, it is in the UK, it is in the US, and you find it in great concentrations within the halls of academia. And that is this suicidal self-immolation, where they literally bought into the nonsense that we've had our day in the sun, it's over, let's just collapse, get it over with, deindustrialize our populations, collapse in a Green New Deal, and just sit idly by as this power vacuum is filled. All the while, we'll sit there and debate amongst ourselves which one of the 3,000 genders we are. And this is an insane methodology that has crept into the West. And this is also why that as this empire is falling, and the institutions of this quote-unquote empire has fallen, you're seeing the rise of nationalism. You're seeing the rise of a populist pushback, number one. And number two, the thing that kills me the most of this managed decline is nobody has the balls. Well, aside from Trump, who just recently said what the actual survival rate of this virus is, the survivability rate, nobody has the balls, and I don't see it in the UK, I don't see it in Europe, where they're out there saying, hey, you know what? The actual survivability rate of this virus, if you're between the ages of 20 and 49, is 99.997. Let's not shut down our economies. Let's, those who are the vulnerable positions, let's treat them. Let's get them quarantined. Let's have them wearing masks. Let's, make sure that we take care of them, that they're well protected. There's no more of a logical discussion. Everything that I've seen in the West, Paul, is a heavy-handed, one-sided affair with everything. And that is a clear systemic sign of stupidity. I don't find that in other countries in especially in the East. Paul, why is it like that? When did we get so dumb?
the trouble, the truth is that the West, people always look at things and think the West started collapsing because of the virus. Or, oh no, well, maybe it was in 2008 with Lehman and the so-called great financial or global financial crisis. No. They point to the dot-com era. No. The West was failing, or the US in particular has been in fail mode since the Great Depression. And the irony is, even though it came out at the end of the war, where everyone else was bankrupt, and the US took advantage and went, well, you're all bankrupt, we're your creditors, you're going to adopt the dollar, this is the new way the world's going to operate. But the US has been in failure mode, and the West for 90 years. The East has been rising for 75 years. And it takes that long for empires to collapse and empires to rise. And that's something, all the indications along the way was we failed in the dot-com era. It was a complete nonsense. 2008 was the moment when the West should have just gone, we've completely failed. It's time to just admit defeat. But no, we just carried on going, well, somehow we'll normalize the economy, we'll normalize the financial system with QE and zero interest rate policy. And the irony is the virus has actually accelerated the demise immensely. Why? Because the Fed suddenly had to sit there and go, well, we've got no choice. We have to print trillions of dollars. Bank of England, I think 500, 600, 700 billion pounds. It's all, scalable. The European Union, 750 billion and trillions of others. And the reason they had to do it was because they had no choice. And now we've got to the point where the Fed's going, we're out of ammunition. We can keep printing. Yeah, don't get me wrong. They can print $1,000 trillion. They can print infinite amounts of dollars, but there's no return. There's no point doing it anymore. Now they're turning around to.
Well, yeah, it doesn't buy you purchasing power. You can
No.
print all you want. Printing doesn't. Give
It's
you
not.
purchasing
It's not
power.
resolving the economy, and the economy can't be resolved. But they're telling the Treasury, well, you're going to have to print. It's down to you. It's fiscal stimulus, so it's hyperinflation effectively. But there's no solution to it, and then we have ludicrous situations where companies in Chapter 11 bankruptcy are getting people bailing them out for billions of dollars instead of just going, these businesses have all failed, the entire system's failed. But no, they can't do this because they know once it's gone, it's gone. So they'll keep defending the indefensible, but principally where it all went wrong, as all empires fail, is arrogance, ignorance, and also basically treating the people that made the empire with disdain. And when you add all those three things up, all empires will collapse. It also is when it stops kind of expanding, it stops innovation, it stops new development, it just rests on its laurels and go, we're top dog, no one can challenge us. And once an empire reaches its zenith, and it stops growing and developing, of course it's going to fail. And that's whether people hate China, like China, loathe it, whatever, it doesn't matter. China succeeds because it has, ironically, you call it a totalitarian government, call it what you like, it's a one-party state. But it works for China because they make long-term plans. They stick to it. So they haven't reached their zenith. They haven't even
They don't have lawyers, Paul. They don't have lawyers.
Well, also it's a meritocracy for, people are in positions of authority because they're capable of doing it.
Yeah, they're more profit minded than the scum sucking lawyers that run our country. That's the problem. And this is the issue here, where we need to in the United States we need to take a very long, hard look at our politicians and ask ourselves why is it that certain of profession, a certain particular profession, the lawyers, why are they in hyper representation within the halls of Congress and in the Senate? Why are they there? And within those, these are all Harvard, Yale idiots. These are all morons who've swallowed the pill of neoliberalism. These are all idiots who've believed in the nonsense of neoliberal enlightenment. They're the ones who believe in globalism and globalization. Or they're the other kind, where they come up through the ranks and they become sheep-dipped neocons, where no matter which angle you look at, you're getting one form of an extreme idiot or the other. It's like what Clint Eastwood said. If I hate the far right idiot because if you run far right enough, you'll run into the far left idiot. It's the same idiot, This is the problem. Something needs to systemically change. But in terms of talent, in terms of entrepreneurialism, and I've done business, and I still do have operations and businesses that I deal with in China. They're incredible. They're incredible in what they're able to do. But in terms of having a maverick approach to business, and I think the U.S. still has that in spades. It's just we are lions led by lambs. We're lions led by idiots.
But you know what though? Like for the most part, we enable it.
We do, and it's
we
our
enable
fault.
it. So
if there's anybody to blame, it's us.
We enable it. We continue.
Well, yeah, but go
ahead, Paul.
But that's because we buy into a bullshit partisan political system. We actually sit there in the US every 4 years, the UK 5 years now, where we go, oh, well, I'll just vote this lot out because the next lot will change everything. And we sit there all our lives going, oh, it's going to be different this time. It's going to be different this time. And it's not going to be different. And yes, I'm not disputing there is absolute corruption that exists in government. And there's lobbyists and there's also all manner of things go on when no one's disputing it. But the bottom line is fundamentally Western nations are incapable of dealing with a crisis. They've never had a crisis to deal with since World War II. And then when a crisis comes about like this, they're incapable. They're even incapable of saving their own empire. Never mind forget they may not want to do a damn thing for the average person in the street. Fair enough. Well, not fair enough, but fair enough from their perspective. But they're incapable of saving their own empire. And the reason they fail is because 2008 shouldn't have happened. 2008 happened because they'd already failed. And in their desperation to cling on to it, they just kept going, well, what can we do? I know, we'll just print loads of money. We'll keep Wall Street going. We'll keep the banks going. We'll create all these asset bubbles. But don't worry, it'll eventually normalize itself. And if we keep pursuing this, eventually, you know, it'll sort itself out. And the one thing is, they kept the illusion going. And what did they not do? They took no notice of the reality, which is the real economy. And the real economy's been cratering and cratering and cratering. And all the virus did was just an accelerant of the collapse of everything. And at the end of the day, as I say, if everything collapses, the corporations go, why? I mean, look, here's a great example. Look at the airlines. The airlines will crater and collapse because no one gets on the plane. No one gets on planes because of all the restrictions in place. But when people don't have any money, no one's going to get on planes. If no one's got any money, they're not going to buy cars. If they don't buy cars and they don't buy those sort of things, no one's going to be filling up. You call it gas, we call it petrol, diesel. What happens to the oil companies? And you just keep filtering through and you go, when you blow everything up, everything gets affected. You can't have this idea, well, they'll just kill us all, stick us in hamster wheels, keep us on universal basic income, but their empire is going to tick along and they're going to. It's impossible because they rely on hundreds of millions of obedient people thinking the system, the US thinking that, they're getting something out of the system, even though the system's screwing them, and we're just making enough. And we'll go and buy new cars, we'll buy houses, we'll go and buy clothes, we'll go and buy new appliances for the house. And that's what keeps those corporations going. If you stop that, corporations fold and collapse. And that's why you're seeing it with big corporations. Look at not just the airlines, look at the oil sector. The oil sector is collapsing. Exxon announced 15% of its workforce will be made redundant. It won't be the last of it. So are we saying that the big oil corporations aren't part of a sort of deep state globalist thing? Of course they are. They're collapsing. So the idea that anybody thinks that this is some kind of plan, so they're going to destroy everything themselves? No. But this is a consequence of the fact that they abused the system. They were arrogant because they thought it didn't matter. They were ignorant to the consequences. And what have they done? They've ignored the well-being of the people, the very people who made these empires, the hundreds and millions or the tens of millions in the UK that make that empire for them function. They treated us with disdain, and now it's all blowing up and it's all disintegrating. And there's no solution. My concern, though, more than anything, is there is inevitably going to be a vacuum that exists. When everything blows up, and the economy collapses, the financial system, society collapses, there's going to be a vacuum. And what fills the vacuum in the short term in Western nations, for me, is a big concern. And I'm sorry to say that I'm absolutely no fan of Biden. I don't think. But if you have to choose, you'd probably say Trump would be a better option. But Trump's not going to save America. America's finished. And all this idea, well, we're voting for Trump to save us from Marxism and socialism. What do they think has been going? What do they think the Fed's been doing? That's socialism, as most people understand it. QE to infinity is not going to end, so they're going to have to bail everyone out. That's socialism. And you can't end socialism because Trump gets elected. I'm not saying if you put Biden in, it would be better, of course. It'd probably even be worse. But the point is, we're at that point. There's no US president can save the US because it's crumbling, it's disintegrating, it's falling apart. And if people don't believe that, why is Pompeo stomping around the world trying to convince everybody not to trade with China, not to cooperate, not to work with them? China's the Antichrist or whatever you want to call it. Why do you think do you think he's doing that because the US is in a position of ascendancy and strength? No, he's doing it because he knows that China is in the ascendancy. And what did the IMF say? The Chinese economy is 17% greater or larger than the US economy on a PPP basis, which is a far better mechanism for measuring an economy. So they admit it. And that's the reality. Just look at what the US is doing. The US isn't behaving like a nation that's in the ascendancy anymore. It's just lashing out at anyone and everything. If its own allies don't agree with it, it wants to sanction them into oblivion. And look, and here's the other thing. Look at what happened with Iran and the arms embargo. The entire world said, no, you're not reimposing it. You left the JCPOA. What do is it? Germany, France, the UK, all voted against the United States and said, no, you're not implementing more sanctions on Iran. You're not going to implement the arms embargo. You're not going to have a snapback because you walked away from the JCPOA. And the Western nation went, no. And what did the US do? Go, we're still imposing sanctions. That's done. That's not a position of strength. That's a position of weakness that the US has to lash out and try and sanction anyone and everyone. And this is a big problem. And also what concerns me, and I've said this on Twitter and on my own podcast, I'm concerned that there's too much far-right policies creeping into the Trump administration. I've said it before, his administration has been hijacked. And if people don't believe it's been hijacked, look at US foreign policy. Why are they in Syria trying to starve people into submission? They're trying it in Iran. They're trying it in Venezuela. They're trying color revolutions everywhere, Belarus. They're meddling in Armenia and Azerbaijan. They're trying to actually have a color revolution in Moldova. They've tried to overthrow Maduro. They've tried it in Nicaragua and Cuba. They're trying to keep the war going in Ukraine. The list goes on and on. That is not the policy of what Trump was elected on. That is neocon on steroids policy. So, and it concerns me that when Trump almost certainly will win the election, but I mean, you can never say never, but as I said to CJ, I'd be gobsmacked if he doesn't win. But then there's a part of me that goes, well, I wouldn't be surprised if Biden wins, but logically Trump will win. Well, that might only embolden the neocons in his administration to be even more bold. I mean, they only recently, if it wasn't for the US military, there could have been a conflict with China. And the US military keeps balking against the Trump administration. And only for the US military, people say he didn't launch any wars. There'd have been a war with Iran, there'd have been a war with North Korea, and probably a war with China. Now, thank goodness the US military intervened, because if the Trump administration and whoever is responsible had actually got away with what the plan was, there would be major global conflicts now. Again,
I don't know, Paul. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think Trump doesn't strike me as somebody who wants to start a whole spat of different wars. Now,
no, I'm not saying no. I agree, it's not Trump, but at the end of the day, his administration's hijacked, and if his administration's doing things like this, what does it matter whether he's the president or not? Because at the end of the day,
you remember the Reagan years, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Reagan years, what I found to be most interesting was this. You had a guy that came in there. He was literally trying to change things, shake things up, and whatnot. The first 4 years that he was there, and at that point, he was surrounded by a lot of technocrats. I mean, these were guys who were card-carrying members of the Trilateral Commission. The whole Brzezinski group, Kissinger. They were still floating on. They're all technocrats, and people were wondering, why are these technocrats there? Well, when you look at certain systems, these individuals seem to be the best in that respective category of systems in which they need to operate. Now, it's the same thing here. You got those individuals. It's how do you manage it? Because the messy thing, the more I look at this, I start realizing it's less and less black and white, and 1,000 shades of gray. When we look at the Ukraine thing, there's still, and I believe this, Paul, I believe that there's still an out-of-control foreign policy that has not been reined in. It has not been fully dealt with. I believe that there are rogue elements at play. I don't believe that the president has total and complete control over the grand scale of things, number one. Number two, I believe it's Trump that has stopped all the potential wars with China, with Iran, with anything else. Because had the military-industrial complex had its way, we would have been in a full-on nuclear exchange from day one with the Russians and the Chinese, and you and I would be broadcasting from some ash heap somewhere in New York, or glowing in the dark, you know.
No,
And
look,
yeah,
let's be. I want to make it absolutely clear so people don't get the wrong end of the stick. I am not accusing Trump of being complicit in things. I'm just saying his administration was hijacked, and because of that, there is a lot of foreign policy decisions that. But to be fair, with regards to Trump, in his, I mean, you can only say naivety. He was all for a blockade of Venezuela with the Navy, and the military went, "You've got to be joking. We're not doing that." Do you know what the outcome of that will be?
it'll be an act of war.
Yeah, and so at times in his naivety, he has made some mistake with regards to Syria. He was told, "Don't," when there was the whole bogus chemical weapons attack. Mattis, of all people, said, "Do not launch any military strike on Syria," and Trump went ahead and did it. And what is absolutely clear on some level, there are elements in the U.S. military who are very, very diametrically opposed to Trump. Now, people could say, "Well, there's lots of different reasons why that might be the case," and yes, I would agree with that. But the point is, part of it is because from their perspective, if they have to clear up the mess with regards to certain U.S. foreign policy decisions, their argument is, "You're the commander in chief. You're ultimately responsible. You need to rein this in." Now, okay, no one's trying to just say, "Well, it's very easy for a president who's constantly under fire," and he has been for his entire presidency. I'm not doubting that either. But all the objectives Trump's set out with, he's not achieved any of it. Now, okay. Arguably he gets a second term, but how much? People keep giving him latitude. It's always, well, it's going to happen now he's elected. No, it'll happen after the midterms. No, it'll happen when he's elected again. And people just keep pushing off and I think a lot of that, they just want to believe that Trump's going to succeed because they believe, well, if Trump doesn't succeed, what the hell happens to the United States? Well, and in any case, how does one man take on an establishment? It's impossible. I mean, unless you've got a lot of support in all the various branches of government and people siding on the right side of the fence as far as Trump's concerned, if he doesn't have those people playing ball with it, how's he ever going to succeed? It's impossible. One man,
Well,
look at whatever you think of Kennedy. Kennedy took on the establishment, and look what happened to it.
he got his brains painted on the side of a Lincoln Continental.
Now, I'm not suggesting that happens to Trump, but my point is unless you have the support internally, and at the moment there isn't any indication. I mean, what's very clear is the corporations don't support Trump, the banks don't support Trump.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be against Trump, and now that's just a statement of fact. I'm not condoning it. I'm not agreeing with it. But my concern is that Trump gets re-elected, and inevitably the U.S. economy is going to implode within the next 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then how does he handle the fallout of that? How is he going to explain to the American people, well, I kept telling you we have this greatest economy and all these things that isn't a reality? And what's going to happen with regards to the average American who looks at the fallout of what's going to happen in reality? And I'm just concerned that I think people are putting a lot of hope and faith in Trump, and I think it's misplaced. Not because I think Trump wouldn't want to do the right things, but I just don't see how he is going to succeed in doing it. And there's all the idea, well, after the election, all these things are going to happen. Well, if they do, wonderful. No one could, it would be the best thing ever if the United States turned on its head. All the problems were removed. It stopped all these pointless wars and conflicts across the world. It'd be the greatest thing that ever happened to the planet. Every nation on the planet would be thrilled to see that happen. But the reality is, how does it happen? How is this actually going to manifest itself as a reality? When in fact, of course, the US economically is in complete freefall. It's not as though the US is in a position where it's got a crap foreign policy. that needs to change. It's internally, everything has to change. It's losing, the world's reserve currency. It's losing its hegemony status. Everything's against the Trump administration, and people seem to have forgotten that you set against that backdrop, and somehow Trump's going to miraculously resolve all this. Well, put it this way: if he did, then he would go down undoubtedly in history as the most incredible leader that will ever have walked this planet. Well, it's nice to believe that, but is it reality? And the answer is just simply no. Sorry to be so brutal, but he can't succeed. It's impossible.
Well, let's war game a little bit. Let's peruse down. Let's just say this. Okay. Let's just say he has support. Okay.
Okay.
Let's just say that there are elements that are in positions of power that are backing this guy. Because if it wasn't, he'd be dead a long time ago.
Well,
right?
nobody's yes, but also he's seen as a useful tool for U.S. foreign policy because he's not actually getting in the way of. I mean, he's effectively sanctioned, starving the Syrian people into submission. Didn't have a problem.
Stupid
with that.
move. I think.
Yeah.
I think in foreign policy.
Let's forget that. Let's assume.
Yeah,
let's go through your scenario. Yeah, go on.
Let's okay. So we look at Syria, right? Definitely an F there, right? Doesn't know he's not getting good intel there, whatsoever. Stupid move. I don't like Venezuela, the Venezuelan situation either. But let's not forget the cartel of the Suns and who they are in Venezuela. Back to Trump in the domestic issues. I think there is some evidence. I think there's a good amount of evidence, actually, where there is support that he is getting from certain, call them factions, call them individuals, groups that are within the military power structure, certain politicians, certain businesses, certain corporations, certain banks. There is support there. His success wouldn't be as it is right now. I mean, there's not been a politician in American history that can go into a field in Pennsylvania and 57,000 people show up. And he's done this repeatedly. So there's something to this guy that's beyond just the cult of personality. You want to see the cult of personality who's a perfect sheep-dipped idiot? It's Barack Obama. Perfect example. So let's just say he has that support, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say that, again, we're all dealing with 1,000 areas of gray hair. We're all reading other people's mail. We don't know what the hardline data is underneath all this drivel, right? Underneath all of it, right? Let's just say he has the support, and he's able to he wins re-election, which he will, and he's able to get some major projects flowing that will start rebuilding, retooling, revitalizing a physical economy in the United States as quickly and rapidly as possible. At that point, he's done something that's twofold. Number one, he stopped the decimation and destruction. He's stopping the bleeding that's happening in the United States economy and its power structure as a whole. The second thing, if he's able to build up that physical economy, we stand to be able to renegotiate the debt and come back to the table in this entire global reset, so have you, where we are able to come to the table amongst peers and renegotiate for a better multipolar world that the United States itself will have a hand in. Because that's the two things. I think those are the two biggest things that are coming down the pike as we speak, Paul. What do you think?
Okay, well let's assume, and there's been a lot of speculation that Trump has support in certain quarters, and there is an argument that says, well,
because if he didn't, this guy would have been done, Paul.
Yeah,
look,
but the problem is
nobody escapes Washington D.C.
Yeah, but the problem is if anything happened to Trump, there'd be a revolution in the U.S. and they know that.
Right.
that, I mean, because you're absolutely right. He has enormous support amongst the people. So he was untouchable in that regard. The issue with regards to, well, something's coming down the track. Why didn't they do it in his first term? I mean, here's the thing. Even though we can't comprehend how, on Tuesday, he might not be the president anymore. You wouldn't take the risk of going, well, we'll do it in a second term. We'll start to roll everything out in a second term and take the risk that he might not even get a second term. So, I mean, okay, that's a hell of a gamble. And okay, maybe it's a gamble that someone thinks it is possible. The problem with regards to the US and renegotiating things with nation, the problem with that the US has is that you have Trump decided he'd go to war with China on trade with regards to this trade deal, and it's completely blown up in the US's favor. They're the ones who are, people will disagree, but it's a fact. The US has lost the trade war. They also, in the process, you've got Pompeo stomping around the world, telling everyone you either trade with us or you're our enemy. You making all kind of propaganda statements and about the Chinese, and doing everything to piss the Chinese off enormously for the last 2.5, 3 years. China's no longer going to sit at the table and say to the United States, well, okay, we'll come to some agreement. They're not going to do it because they're looking at the US going, hang on, you've done everything to try and destroy us. You're trying to destroy our credibility on the world stage. And you really think we're going to sit down and renegotiate things? Because bear in mind, of course, China, if it wasn't for China, the US would have collapsed in 2008. It's not a well-known fact that China bailed the United States out at that point and agreed to do it. Well, this time around, they're not going to agree to do it because the US is trying to do everything to undermine them. If Trump had been benign to China, even just benign and, didn't get involved in things, then China may have looked at it and gone, well, okay, you haven't stomped all over us or tried to do anything. But the one thing he was supposed to do was normalize relations with China. And he didn't. And okay, for whatever reason, it's history, but that never came to fruition. And the one thing that really angers China more than anything at the moment is when he keeps going, the China virus. Every time he opens his mouth and says that, Beijing's going, the carotid arteries throbbing because they're absolutely sick of it. And you only have to look at Xi Jinping's recent speech he made in Beijing. He couldn't have been any clearer to say we are sick to death of the US hegemony. We're sick to death of US attitude and policy. They've reached the end of the road with the US. And Putin said in a slightly more sort of subtle way, but we're not the same intensity, exactly the same thing at Valdai. The US has ran out of road. If you reined Pompeo's neck in a bit and in fact have fired him and never put him in that position in the first place, because the damage he's doing to the US's reputation internationally is enormous. So the problem is, setting aside if Trump has the support, and wonderful if he does, okay, well, internally they might be able to do things. But then the question is, how are they going to finance? They're going to need trillions of dollars to rebuild America. Who's going to finance this? Well, they can't, because if they just print all the money themselves, that's just Venezuela, Zimbabwe territory. The alternative is someone's going to have to, in the world's going to have to buy the debt. Well, the other thing is, even if someone wants to, which given everyone's rejecting the dollar and doesn't want to hold dollars anymore, the problem you've got is in the new world, in a post, world reserve currency status for the dollar. If someone buys 10-year treasuries, for argument's sake, they're not going to be, getting a yield of 0.8%. And someone's going to go, we want 6-7%. And the US has a debt that it can't sustain anyway. It can't take on trillions more dollars of that kind of debt, and that's assuming China is going to reciprocate and say we agree to this. They may agree, but they may exact a very, very damaging price to the US in doing so by saying, well, okay, if we're going to give you trillions of dollars, to rebuild America. Here's the deal. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to hand over this. We're going to take these assets. If you don't like it, we'll walk away and you'll have nothing. And I'm not condoning that. That is concerns me greatly. There, and we've said it for a long time, that China just stomps in and will just pick off US assets for a cent on the dollar, and there's nothing the US can do about it. So
I don't know about that, man.
Well, but why would they want to? Why will they want to support the US after the US has tried to do everything to destroy them?
Because they're pragmatic.
Yeah, but
because they're pragmatic in the sense that when this is all the Game of Thrones. This is the political dance that every country does, right? So let's, the question you said is, how are the U.S. going to rebuild after its collapse? Right? That's if it collapses, or it depends on how we define collapse. Is it going to be a catastrophic, a Weimar Republic type event, or is it going to be an orderly takedown and reorganization? And I think what we're going to see is most possibly, again, depending on which school of thought wins and depending on what the administration does, there is a propensity here for an orderly reorganization. And it'll be done in the same manner how we rebuilt after the Civil War, how we rebuilt after World War I, how we rebuilt after the Great Depression in 1929. It's not going to be Mad Max. It's not going to be anything. And at the end of the day, if they're able to do that, restructure the credit markets, you still have a viable market. And you still have a powerful country with a powerful military that right now that China can't project into. And granted, they got some advanced missiles. But in terms of global reach, they just don't have that.
Yeah, but Russia and China have just been making the very subtle comment, or maybe we'll form a military alliance. They already have a military alliance.
But Paul, let's also look at the whole the Russo-Sino thing, Paul. Let's look at that, right?
Yes.
You and I both know the long history of the Russians and the Chinese. They're not bosom buddies. They're not the bosom buddies that.
No, they are now, though. That's the part the West completely miscalculated. Yes, in history, and do you know why they learned? Xi and Putin learned the lesson and realized who was behind, why they were seemingly at loggerheads in history. The West, and they went, "We're not falling for this crap anymore." And they know the US at the moment is trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China because they're sort of trying to get Putin back on side. And the Chinese and the Russians are looking at this going, do you really think we're that stupid? The Chinese-Russian alliance is unbreakable because they know that they've learnt in history. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct. They were completely, torn asunder and they could never agree on anything. But they're doing everything now. Everything they do is in lockstep. When one of them goes into one country, 2 weeks later, the other one makes announcements about trade deals or some military agreement or some cooperation. They have mutual interest in each other. China needs all the energy, and Russia can provide all its energy and everything it needs. So therefore, there is a necessary dependence. China needs Russia also because of the Eurasian axis. It needs routes through Russia. If it didn't, the Belt and Road Initiative would collapse. I mean, essentially, that's the part the West's missing. It thinks that this is a tenuous relationship. It's not. It's a relationship that is unbreakable. And whatever the West tries to do to break it, it will never break it. And that's why. And here's the other thing. Why do we think that why the US is trying to destroy China? It's trying to destroy them because it knows that China's in the ascendancy. I mean, look, the digital yuan's a great example. The West sat there going, we want a digital currency. They don't even know why they want them. They're not even at the stage of even thinking about it. China's already done enormous pilot tests. It's actually started to have civilians testing it. That's the mechanism for internationalizing the yuan. That's why the US is in panic mode and Pompeo's stomping around the world, visiting every country, telling them not to trade with China. Don't trust the Chinese. They're going to put you, they're going to do what the IMF has done, the World Bank's done to you for decades. And because they're threatened, because they know China poses, they believe China's going to replace the US. They're going to, and then there's a lot of people in the West who think, well, if China becomes the ascendant power, they're going to dominate. They're going to turn us all into totalitarian nation. China would never do that because it's got the intelligence to look at the US and go, well, look at what hegemony does to a nation. It destroys it. So isn't it far better to have cooperation with other nations? So no, the China-Russia thing, it's an unbreakable bond between those two nations. And because they know full well that if they were to be divided and conquered, then that would be the end. And it'd be the end for them as nations, and they're not going to get sucked into that. So I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm not saying eventually at some point there might be some agreement. But the US also got very angry with the Chinese because they wanted another Plaza Accord. And the Chinese said to them, do you really think you're going to do to us what you did to the Japanese with the last Plaza Accord? Because the whole point of the last Plaza Accord was Japan was on track to replace the United States as the world's biggest economy.
Correct.
So they stuffed the Japanese over deliberately by saying, well, we want to devalue the dollar. And they've been trying to persuade the Chinese to do it. And China's gone, you must be joking. We're not having a Plaza Accord with you because we know exactly what your game is. So this is the problem. There's no trust. There's absolutely zero trust between the Chinese and the US and the Russians and the US. I mean, and that is a fundamental problem that has to be addressed. And okay, Russia's a huge problem for Trump. We know because of all the bullshit. The whole Russiagate crap. I mean, yeah, it's utter nonsense. But with China, and we said from day one, it was one of the biggest mistakes his administration ever made. And the reason is they arrogantly thought we'll win the trade war. China will back off. They also thought when we had the pandemic, they actually believed the US that China would collapse, and it would actually the Chinese, the government would collapse, China would completely fold, and that would be the end of China, without actually realizing that was never going to be a reality. And again, it's just this miscalculation. And maybe when Trump's reelected, almost certainly, maybe something different will come about. But you know what? I think the anti-Chinese rhetoric is going to get worse and worse and worse. It's not going to improve. And we said back in February 2018, you're going to see anti-Chinese propaganda and anti-Chinese sentiment worse than anything that's been, that's been, levied at Russia. And lo and behold, it's happened. Do I think that's going to improve? No, because here's the one thing. When the US economy does completely crater, which all Western nations will do, when the financial system implodes, the dollar loses its reserve currency status, who's Trump going to blame? He's going to tell the American people it's China. China caused this. China caused that. Everything amongst Trump's supporters is it's China, it's China. China did this, China did that. And China's looking at this going, you want to normalize relations with us? You want us to treat you with respect and decency? Well, until you change all these attitudes, why would they want to do anything to help America? Because the truth is, China, this is the other thing the West hasn't grasped. China doesn't need the West. It's got Southeast Asia is going to be the major economies for the next decade, maybe a bit less. They've got Africa. They don't need Europe. The Europeans actually at one point arrogantly thought they could dispense with China. And then suddenly the European Union went, shit, we need China. We can't do without China. The same reason why all the Western financial institutions, corporations want a piece of China, because they understand that China's not going to be selling cheap crap goods to the West anymore. They're rotating their economy. It's going to be this enormous consumption market that has high-tech industry. So they're going to have an export market that's high-tech. They're not going to have the cheap crap anymore. Some other nation in the world can produce that. And they're going to have this enormous consumption market. And what do? They've been buying assets up all over the world that supply that. So they're part of the supply chain as well. And the West looking at this consumption market in Southeast Asia and going, we want a piece of that, because they know that it's going to be enormous. So they have no incentive to want to return to the US either. Even though, I mean, Trump's tried to convince them, tried to threaten them with tariffs, and they've all just gone, no, we're not interested. We're not coming home. Why do we want to come home? It's of no benefit to do that. Now, eventually, I think that will change at some point because the US will eventually become a market where it can have a thriving manufacturing base again. But to get there, it's going to have to completely live within its means, and that's the big problem the US has faced. It's been abusing its position. It's lived way beyond its means for decades and decades. Now it's going to have to learn to live within its means. So it can't have a big military budget. It can't go stomping around the world. It doesn't need a big military budget, we know.
Correct.
It's going to have to live within its means and to grow and develop. And that's going to take way longer than a Trump administration. It's going to take a decade. It could take 20 years. I don't know. Eventually, the US will be a great nation amongst equals. I've always said that. And the day it is, the world will be a much richer place for it. But there's no simple solutions. And the longer Trump keeps, with this rhetoric with China, it's very, very damaging. And that needs to stop, and maybe it will stop. But I fear as the US economy gets weaker and weaker, he'll blame it all on the China virus, and all his supporters will go, yeah, it's China. It's China this, China that. It's like the whole Xinjiang story. It was never a problem, Xinjiang, until suddenly we had the trade war with China. And all this stuff started coming out the West about what goes on in Xinjiang. Well, wasn't it a problem before that? No, apparently it's only a problem once this, it's just this kind of snowballing effect of attacking China for all manner of things. If it was a problem before 2018, no one in the Western world ever talked about it. No one said it was a problem because it isn't what the Western people imagine it is, because it's a load of propaganda bullshit, most of it. And that's, sorry to say, it's the truth. And you only have to prove that. The US, this is the problem. The US doesn't have a problem with nations until it is a problem, and then everything that nation does is wrong. And we have a history of doing this. Well, yeah, eventually the US will get there. I don't doubt it. But it's got a long way to go to recover, because when empires collapse, they don't just miraculously bounce back and become a strong nation. So it's got a long period of redevelopment, a long period where it needs to change its attitude. Because the truth is, and it's not the American people, but a lot of the world really detests administrations in the US because they see them as arrogant, ignorant, bullying, overbearing, hypocritical. And that's
and not honestly, being able to hold a treaty whatsoever.
Yeah, and not being trustworthy. And it's not the American. Let's be absolutely clear. It's got nothing to do with the American people. The American people are liked all over the world. People don't, but they detest
the government.
And then what does the government do? They go to the American people. They don't like us because of our freedoms.
Yeah,
no,
stupidity.
They don't like the fact that you're abusing them in these despicable ways. And how do you change that ideology? Well, let's say Trump comes in the second term. How does he change the ideology where the Americans go, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to, and I know he's tried to bring forces home from Syria and Afghanistan. I'm not saying, and I know at times Trump's tried to do things, and I don't want to be too critical of him, but he's the president. Ultimately, he's responsible. So how does he find a way to change that? And and that's a huge problem.
I think, Paul, I think the thing that he's injected into the entire conversation, that this is not a Democrat and Republican thing. He said, hey, you know what? My opponent is running as the Democrat. He's running as a proud Democrat for Senate. I'm just running as an American. Is that okay? That's what he said. And I think he's been injecting into this nationalist, populist move that we're starting to see here in the United States. And I think people are starting to register that. The people like, I'm not a Republican, but I do support Trump. We're seeing people both on the left and right that are being attracted to this movement. And if he's able to do that, and we can have, the only way we survive is we have to win the culture. There has to be such a miraculous revival amongst American identity, amongst the American system, which, I mean, you go back into the real history of the United States, where we are a natural fit as an ally, to Russia, and Russia has assisted us during the Civil War. Russia has assisted us. Hell, even during 1776. 1776 never happened in a vacuum. There was a lot of other things that were happening in the world that allowed us to have the Revolutionary War and to be successful at it. So it's this open system that Americans need to embrace. And here's the part I'm worried about, Paul. The changes that need to take place. Can we institute those changes in an irreversible way that could transcend the limitation of another 4-year term?
Absolutely.
That's what I'm terrified of. That's the $20 trillion question, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. That is it in a nutshell. And the other point is, what I would say is, despite all this, is if Trump was, in November the 5th, got on the phone to the Chinese and the Russians and said, look, and do you know what, despite all the myriad of enormous problems that exist, if he actually picked up the phone and said, look, I've had enough of this bullshit. This is ridiculous. We're suffering as a nation. The world's suffering. It's pointless. I want an end to this nonsense. And actually said it in a way that the Chinese and the Russians could trust, not Trump, but, trust his administration. And he said, let's not a Bretton Woods, by the way, but let's have a conference. Let's all get round the table. Let's agree that the US is going to have to change, that it's not feasible anymore for a world reserve currency, that its days in the sun as an hegemonic power are over, but that's not the way the world needs to be. They could all sit down. Do you know what? In the blink of an eye, you could change the world. It's that simple to do this.
Right.
And that's the most frustrating part, despite all the obstacles we've just discussed. If he could do that, and we're nowhere near that point. Let's be absolutely honest. I'm saying it's that simple. It is, but we're nowhere near that position. But if Trump was able to do that, do you know what? The world would change in the blink of an eye. Do you know, instantly the world could start to recalibrate and do the things it needs to do. And if all the biggest nations, so to speak, forget the economy, because the US economy is just in tatters, but let's look at just in terms of, you got the Americans, you got the Russians, you got the Chinese, you got the ASEAN nation. You got all these nations to sit around and say, okay, enough's enough. We're going to be adults finally in the world. We're not going to be these juvenile children anymore, and worse. And sit down. You could resolve the problem. It would be literally that simple. So, is it going to happen at the moment? No. Is it possible? Well, it's always possible. You can never rule anything out. And I think at some point that's precisely what will happen. But you're absolutely right. The US's problem is, and whilst everyone decries is the Chinese system of governance, the one advantage it has is it has a 20-year plan and it sticks to it. And the Chinese people like it because it benefits them. And people go, the Chinese people are oppressed by their government. They're not. If the Chinese people didn't like the government, it would be gone tomorrow. It is, and that people go, no, that can't be true. It is true. The simple fact is, if they don't keep making progress, don't keep changing things, Chinese people will not tolerate it. That's why local government in China is what you would almost term a democratic. It makes decisions. And then people go, oh, well, look at all the protests in China. Yeah, they are protesting. They're protesting against the local government and telling the central government, change this because we've had enough of this. That's the fundamental mindset. And you're right. We have to transcend this 4-year term and says, well, actually, we need a governance structure in some way that says we're going to set these policies in motion. They're not going to be changed no matter who is elected. For me, there's an argument that says the US needs a wartime kind of, not literally a wartime, it needs a kind of wartime presidency that says We're not going to have an election every 4 years. And I'm not saying Trump should be president. But they need to find a body of people who can actually turn the United States around, make the necessary policy decisions, and say, right, we've got a 10-year plan, and we're going to stick to it religiously. We're not going to change. We're not going to deviate apart from minor changes. If someone could do that, the US would recover a lot quicker. But you make the point. Let's just say Trump can turn this around. Let's just say Trump does get the support. And what seems impossible in my mindset could happen. And I don't dismiss anything ever. So let's say that happened. And they got the right policies. They're normalizing relations finally with China, Russia, and there's major progress being made. Trump leaves in 4 years' time. And then some other clown comes in, whoever that might be, and all that policy just gets thrown out the window. The shutters get put up, the Cold War mentality exists again, and all the policies get abandoned for something else. And the US is back to square one. So the question is, how do you address that? And that's where, for all the criticisms of China's political structure, and there's plenty of reasons to agree with that, it actually works for 1.4 billion people for now. But at some point, it won't work anymore. And at some point, China will have a different political system. But here's the interesting part for all the criticism. The reason China has made the progress it's made in a matter of a couple of 3 decades, it's because it has that political structure. If it didn't, it would never have got where it is today. But does that mean you want that political structure and we should have it in the West? No. But we have to find some compromise that says, well, we want this, a proper democratic political system. But how do we take these parts that says we have long-term plans we implement? There's nothing at the moment that's in place to do that. Therefore, that is an enormous challenge. So, it's very, very complicated. I'm not, I want to be clear, I'm not dissing Trump. I'm critical of Trump because of things at times he's said and done he shouldn't have himself. But his administration has hamstrung him for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm not disputing that. Do I want Biden to win the election? Absolutely not. Am I confident Trump can succeed in the future? No, I'm not. And it's not a reflection on him specifically. It's just he's got this enormous oil tanker that he's going to have to try and turn around, and it's going to be extremely difficult to do that. Now, maybe something different will transpire. But I think a lot of that is built on hope. And hope's a good thing on one sense, but people should not be disappointed if he doesn't succeed. Well, they should be disappointed because there's a ramification for that. But don't have a really high expectation of him succeeding in doing this, because it would be monumental if he could do it. And history would, I think, if he would remember him as the greatest American president that ever existed. And even in 200 years, people would talk about it as being the greatest era of American presidency. That's the kind of monumental shift. You can't dismiss it.
At this point, that's what's going to take. There's nothing shy, and this is what I've said before to so many people. There's nothing, in order for this to succeed, everything that we've talked about for the several years, Paul, everything from the Washington, D.C. being cleaned out, the economic success, the physical economy being built, everything rests on nothing short of a monumental Herculean turnaround for all of it to work.
Yeah, and to do that, you couldn't do it in 4 years. That's the problem. Even if you put all the steps in place, it's going to take more than 4 years to do that. And you're going back to your point. You're absolutely correct. That is one of the biggest problems, and probably the ultimate challenge the US faces. But that doesn't mean you might not be able to have a political, another term of office with someone who, there is an argument that says, well, if Trump succeeds in this and you're starting to see that progress and development, that whoever replaces Trump, as long as they get someone who's going to be prepared to carry on those policies, let's just say it's on the Republican side, for argument's sake, which it probably would be, then they probably would get re-elected because people can see the progress. So it might be sustainable to have another 8 years of a Trump-like policy-making decision. That gives you 12 years. And maybe then you have that fundamental change. But it always comes back to the point, that, maybe it's just one of those things that time will heal the US political system and the UK one and everything else, because there's going to come a point when the old guard simply won't be here anymore. I mean, it's quite literally as crude as that. They will not be in place anymore. The question is what replaces them, what political system has to replace them, and what's going to actually be beneficial going forward. That's a whole separate question. But the old guard that exists in the US they're not going to be here forever. They're not going to live forever. So at some point, they're all going to go. They're all going to disappear. And that might be the time when you change. It's a bit like, I've used this analogy in the UK. Ironically, it's going to be this might not sound great. The thing that's going to change nations is not the baby boomer era. It's not the people over 50 years of age. Ironically, what's going to have to change nations is the millennials. Now, a lot of people go, "Oh my God, what does that mean?"
God help us. God help us, Paul.
But that is ultimately what's going to drive change, because with all due, and that doesn't mean that you have to adopt what millennials or what we perceive them to think now. But here's the point: the baby boomer generation is now they're just never going to change. They're totally intransigent. The systems work for them pretty well. That, as far as they're concerned, I worked all my life. I got my final salary pension. I've done great out the system. I toiled for 40 years of my life. And their attitude is, well, I'm all right, Jack. So what's the problem? Well, no, that's not how it works in the future. So they're just a lost cause. They're not going to change. And so therefore, what's the future? The future has to lie in younger generations. And they're the ones who are going to have to drive policy changes. Now, the question is, what does that mean? And that's the other problem eventually. There has to be some better understanding of how things move forward. Everyone looks at things and thinks, oh, Trump will just change everything. Well, even if he could, that's not a long-term answer. That is not going to be the solution. The solution has to be still in place long after all of us, you, me, CJ, Trump, and practically anyone over a certain age is no longer on this planet anymore. It still has to be sustainable in the future. That is a monumental shift. And that's why I've said the reset, more than financial, economic, and a these things. It's a reboot it's a reboot in humanity, in how we interact with each other, what we consider to be important, how we, interact within a nation, how we, interact with other nations, how we conduct ourselves as human beings. That's what this is about. And until that fundamental change happens, nothing will really fundamentally change in Western nations. So it is a Herculean effort. Can Trump do it? I mean, I hope he does. Am I confident? No, I'm sorry, I'm not confident, because there's too many things stacked against him. Does that mean he won't succeed? Well, from my perspective, I don't see it. But do I dismiss that that's possible? No, because as I've just said, if he picks up the phone tomorrow or on the 4th and goes, hello, I've had enough of this, let's change it, then that could change. That would change the landscape of the world almost immediately. Is that possible? Yeah, of course it's possible. But Trump has to do that knowing that he won't have 1,000 knives trying to stab him in the back, well, the chest, and everywhere else. That is also a fundamental problem. So, I mean, look, at the end of the day, for me, it was always the case the West was going to implode. The virus accelerated. This was never in doubt. It doesn't mean it's the end. It's just, this is what happens to empires. Empires collapse. Does it mean it's the end of everything? No, you rebuild, of course. I mean, it will always happen eventually at some point. The US will return to a great nation amongst equals, of course. But to get there, you can't just do it. I think, to be honest, there's a naivety in some people that it's a light switch moment. We can just change everything, and suddenly this country will be functioning, really well. You can't do that. That part is impossible. I mean, even if you trust Trump's ability to do the impossible, doing the impossible takes years. I mean, look at Russia. It's still in rebuild, but it's been going through its reset for 20 years. Now, okay, Russia's different to the US. and I don't dispute that. So the US has certain advantages and disadvantages. It's like China. China's been in major growth for 75 years. It's taken them this long. Does that mean the US will take 75 years? No, I don't think it will take 75 years or anywhere near that. But we have to put this in context that there's no precedent that says Trump presses a light switch and the US economy all changes. Because how? We're back to that thing. If you know, it's like if you destroy everything, you can't just instantly rebuild it. And that's something in the UK, finally, the government's going, oh, hell, we can't just turn the economy back on. We're now in the situation where the economy is in free fall. This is going to be a monumental job to fix it and repair it. And of course, the more lockdowns they have, the more they destroy it. And therefore, the problem becomes even greater and insurmountable. So at least finally, there's a recognition. But the West does this because the West's attitude is, we've never had problems. Oh, this isn't a problem. Well, it is because you're not thinking of what the problem is. So we have to accept there are enormous challenges. And this was always the case. So we just have to, I've said the whole time I'm on road, there's no easy answers to this. There's no simple solution. And we as a collective in the West have to accept this. And we're going to have to accept the fact that whatever we can do on an individual basis, we're going to have to do. But there's no easy ride in this. There's no easy solutions because how can you? Empires can't collapse and just miraculously reappear as though it never happened, especially when the multipolar world is in the ascendancy. And that's irrefutable. It's moving east to west. And just look at the economies in Southeast Asia. They're growing. I mean, that's where the future is. That's why Adelson's going, I'm out of America and I'm going to consolidate in Asia, because he's looked at it and gone, that's the future. So, and you'll increasingly see people like that going, the West's finished for now. That doesn't mean it's finished forever, and that's the big difference. So I don't want to, yes, I am critical of Trump because he's the commander in chief. The responsibility ultimately rests with him. Yes, a lot of situations he's had no control over. I don't doubt that. But there are things he could have done, he didn't do. I mean, he was all championing how we've walked away from the JCPOA, and we said at the time, the most stupid decision he's ever made. And now where we are, it's proved to be the most stupid decision he's ever made. Because the world told him, we're not interested in you sanctioning Iran. Iran's now free to develop missiles and to develop technology. If the US hadn't walked away and been part of the JCPOA, Iran wouldn't have been developing missiles now. I mean, and that's the kind of narrow-minded, short-sighted, myopic kind of way of US foreign policy. It's all going all guns blazing, look great, and look how strong we are, and actually make ridiculously crass decisions. China's the same. It's like Nord Stream 2. Trying to sanction Nord Stream 2. Europe's gone to them. Excuse me, what? We're your ally and you want to sanction us and make us buy your expensive LNG? What's that done? That's just turned them towards China, and they've gone, we don't want to trade. We're not, we're going to tariff for Europe as well, the US. And China's just looking at this, and the Europeans going, well, this is a match made in heaven in comparison. Okay, we'll talk to China instead. Again, short-sighted, because they think projecting this power in the world, that the world thinks that is impressed by this, and the world's looking at them going, sorry, we don't want this anymore. What the hell are you doing? And that's the part that the US hasn't learned, and that's the big change. How are they going to change and learn that?
We're coming to a hard stop, so we got about 30 seconds left. If you want to wrap up and I'll also give out the websites and stuff that people can contact you at, go for it.
Right. Okay. Well, obviously, how do you wrap this up? Well, we're doing the election special tomorrow. Looking forward to that, and with you're on, and obviously a host of other guests, and we'll discuss it and see how things unfold on the night. And obviously, for me, we're the Sirius Report, so you can go to the website. We've got our own subscription service. We're up to 1,040 now on the podcast. And that's a subscription service. If you're interested to subscribe, we'd appreciate that. And obviously, look, I want the US to succeed. I've always said this, and
Yes.
Nothing would please me more. But
it'd be better for the whole world if the U.S.,
Yes.
China, Russia, and India. There's 4 countries that could really set the world for 1,000 years of peace, and that's U.S., China, Russia, India. If these 4 countries could really work together and in a peaceful way, I think we could enter a realm of 100 years of peace on this planet, man, and great prosperity growth. And this is what the globalists are trying to divide us over.
Yeah, and that's what we want to, and it would be wonderful. It would be the greatest achievement to see that. And you know what? A great America amongst equals would actually enhance the world
Absolutely.
enormously.
I like what you said. A great America amongst equals.
Yeah, and it will enhance the world to such an extent it would be enormously beneficial to everyone. And you know what? America to regain its status on the world stage as a great custodian will be enormously beneficial to the American people as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well said. And with that being said, folks, I want to thank all of you for listening in. Please make sure you subscribe, like, comment, hit that notification bell. And even though we don't get monetized by YouTube, it helps us with our standings. It helps us fight the algorithms in this massive amounts of censorship that's been going on. So please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and we'll be on tomorrow night with the election special. Make sure you set your reminders. Paul will be on. I'll be on. We'll have Gus is going to be on. CJ is going to be on. I mean, Sunny Reigns. We got who else is joining, man? You got was Jim Willie going to be there or what?
Yeah, Jim's on as well. Yeah.
Perfect. So it's going to be awesome. So you make sure you guys tune in. It's going to be a bombastic time. It's going to be the best election show on the internet. Period. I don't think there will not be a better election show than this. I guarantee you. You can go ahead. You can go watch your Joe Rogans and any of that stuff. It's not even going to be close. It's not even going to be close. So go there right now to the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this, and hit that notification bell because you will be alerted when we go live. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.